Before we start, I want to say that only 1% of you are subscribed. Please subscribe because when we reach 1,000 subscribers, I will post a special video for you. As Thomas guided his spacecraft through the dense atmosphere of Zeria, the sensors flickered with the lush life signatures of the planet below. It was untouched by other explorers, a verdant world sprawling beneath him. He maneuvered his ship towards a clearing, engines humming softly as he touched down on the alien surface. Stepping out into the alien world, Thomas felt a mix of trepidation and excitement. His suit's life support systems adjusted to the external environment, feeding him data about the breathable air and moderate climate. Armed with his exploration kit, he set out to document this new world. Several hours into his trek, Thomas was cataloging flora near a flowing stream when he heard a rustle from the thick undergrowth. He turned, hand on the tranquilizer gun at his belt, only to see a figure cautiously stepping out. It wasn't a creature of scales or fur, but seemed almost human, save for its shimmering blue skin and luminous eyes. The alien, a woman, watched him curiously, her expression a mix of fear and wonder. "Hello," Thomas said slowly, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. His universal translator was still calibrating to her dialect, but it managed to convey his greeting. The alien responded with a soft string of melodic words, her voice flowing like the stream beside them. She stepped closer, her gaze fixed on his face, then on the equipment slung over his shoulder. "My name is Thomas," he tried again, pointing to himself. The translator seemed to work better this time, and her face brightened with understanding. "Alara," she replied, pointing to herself. Her gaze lingered on his gear, filled with innocent curiosity. Thomas smiled, encouraged by her response. "Alara," he repeated. "I'm here to explore, to learn. May I look at your village? Your home?" Alara hesitated for a moment, then nodded slowly. She gestured for him to follow her, leading him through a series of winding paths blanketed with thick moss and vibrant flowers. As they walked, Thomas tried to engage her in conversation, pointing at various plants and creatures, his translator slowly picking up the nuances of her language. "You are alone here?" he asked as they approached what looked like a settlement. Alara's face clouded with a touch of sadness. "Yes, alone. Others have gone. Far journeys," she explained, her words broken but clear enough. Thomas nodded, understanding the loneliness in her voice. "I often travel alone too," he shared, hoping to find common ground. She looked at him, eyes widening slightly, perhaps surprised to find a kindred spirit in this human from the stars. They reached her home, a structure woven from the same vibrant flora that covered the planet. It was both alien and familiar, reminiscent of the organic architecture he'd read about in galactic archives. Alara invited him inside, her movements graceful and inviting. As Thomas crossed the threshold, he looked around with awe. The interior was simple but beautiful, illuminated by natural light that filtered through the walls. Alara offered him a seat on a low, soft bench and began to prepare what looked like a meal. "Is there anyone else?" Thomas asked as he watched her. "No, just me now. Waiting," she said softly, almost to herself. "Waiting for?" Thomas ventured, his curiosity piqued. Alara smiled wistfully, then offered him a bowl filled with an aromatic stew. "For a new beginning. For someone who understands." As they ate, Thomas realized that this encounter might just be the beginning of something extraordinary. Here, on this distant planet, two lonely souls had found a semblance of connection. And in that moment, he decided he would stay a while, to learn more about Alara and Zeria. Perhaps, in each other, they would find not just understanding but a new path forward together. The next morning, Thomas awoke to find Alara busy at a small workstation, her fingers deftly manipulating what appeared to be indigenous fibers. The gentle clacking of her tools, mixed with the chirping of distant wildlife, created a peaceful symphony. Curious, he approached her, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. "What are you making?" Thomas asked, peering over her shoulder. Alara looked up, her face brightening. "Clothing," she explained. "For you. Zephyrian fabric. It breathes with the skin. Good for our weather." Thomas was touched by her thoughtfulness. "Thank you, Alara. That's very kind. Can I help?" She nodded, patting the seat next to her. As Thomas sat down, she began instructing him on how to weave the fibers. Her hands guided his, and although their first attempts were clumsy, they laughed together, enjoying the process. As they worked, Thomas seized the opportunity to deepen their bond through conversation. Alara, can you tell me more about Zeria? About its people? Alara's eyes held a distant sadness as she spoke. Our people are wanderers. Many have left to explore other worlds, other lives. Those of us who remain are few. We live quietly, in harmony with nature. And your family? Thomas ventured carefully. My spouse traveled to another system for a new opportunity. I chose to stay. My heart belongs here, she explained, her voice a soft murmur. Thomas nodded, understanding her attachment to her home. I admire that. Staying true to yourself, it's important. They continued to work in comfortable silence for a while before Thomas changed the subject to lighter topics, discussing Earth and his adventures across the stars. Alara was fascinated, asking questions about the places he'd seen and the creatures he'd encountered. Your world sounds very lively, Thomas. So different from here, she remarked, her tone wistful. It is, but Zeria has its own charm. It's peaceful, beautiful in ways I've never seen before, Thomas replied, smiling. As the day progressed, Thomas proposed a walk around the village to familiarize himself with the local geography and any useful plants. Alara agreed enthusiastically, eager to show him her world. They spent the afternoon walking through the village, Alara pointing out various plants and their uses. Thomas documented everything with his portable scanner, fascinated by the biodiversity. He noticed Alara's spirits seemed to lift as she shared her knowledge, her loneliness momentarily forgotten. When they returned, Alara prepared a traditional Zephyrian meal for dinner. She taught Thomas how to season the food with native spices, and he helped her cook, following her instructions carefully. As they ate, Thomas noticed the sun setting, casting a warm glow over the landscape. The sunsets here are incredible, he said, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Alara smiled, following his gaze. It's my favorite time of day. Everything is calm, and for a moment, it feels like time stands still. Thomas looked at her, struck by the poetic nature of her words. Alara, I'm glad I met you. This place, it's more than just a stop in my travels now. It's a memory I'll cherish. Alara met his gaze, her eyes reflecting the hues of the sunset. And I'm glad to share it with someone who appreciates its beauty, she replied softly. As the evening deepened, they cleaned up together, the ease between them growing. Their shared activities not only bridged the gap between their worlds, but also sowed the seeds of a deepening connection, one that promised to grow with each shared experience and exchanged story. The following days on Zeria brought Thomas and Alara even closer. Thomas was eager to integrate more into Alara's world, and Alara was just as eager to share it with him. One morning, while they were having breakfast made from the local fruits that Alara had taught Thomas to prepare, she suggested an activity that caught him by surprise. Today is special, Alara began, her eyes twinkling with excitement. It's the day of Zeria, a celebration of the stars and their guidance. We dance to thank the stars. Would you like to learn? Thomas chuckled, a bit self-conscious but intrigued. I'm not much of a dancer, but I'd love to try. Lead the way. Alara led him to a clearing surrounded by towering violet trees. The ground was soft, covered with moss and petals that had fallen from the branches. Alara explained the significance of each part of the dance, how each step and movement represented a journey through life and the cosmos. Then, slowly, she began to demonstrate. Watch closely, she said, moving with a fluid grace that seemed to blend with the wind itself. Thomas watched, mesmerized by her connection with the surroundings. Now, you try, Alara encouraged, stepping forward to guide him. With her hands in his, Thomas attempted to mirror her steps. At first, he was clumsy, his movements awkward compared to her fluid motions. But Alara was patient, guiding his steps with gentle corrections and encouraging smiles. You're getting it, she assured him as he started to move more confidently. As they danced, Thomas felt something shift between them. The physical closeness, the rhythm of their movements, and their isolated world seemed to weave around them a growing bond that was more than just friendship. He found himself looking into Alera's luminous eyes, not just following her lead, but truly connecting with her. The dance ended, but they remained close, breathless, and laughing at their shared effort. The moment felt charged, a palpable tension hanging between them like the charged air before a storm. Alera looked up at him, her cheeks flushed with exertion and perhaps something more. It was then that Thomas realized how beautiful she was, not just in appearance but in spirit. "Alera, this was amazing," Thomas breathed out, still holding her hands. "Yes, it is," she replied, her voice a whisper. "It's been so long since I shared this with anyone." They stood there for a moment longer, neither wanting to break the contact. Finally, Thomas spoke, his voice low and sincere. "Alera, But before he could finish, Alera stepped forward and did something he hadn't expected. She kissed him. It was a soft, exploratory kiss, testing the waters between them. Thomas responded in kind, his hands moving to her waist as he kissed her back. The kiss deepened, driven by the weeks of growing affection and the intense connection of the day's dance. When they finally parted, they were both breathless. Alera's eyes searched his, looking for an answer or perhaps an affirmation. Thomas smiled, squeezing her hands gently. "I think I understand the dance much better now," he joked, his tone light but his eyes serious. Alera laughed, a sound of pure joy and relief. "So do I." As they walked back to her home, their hands remained intertwined. The dance had started as a lesson but had ended as a revelation, opening a new chapter in their relationship. It was clear now that what they shared was heading towards something neither had anticipated, but both seemed eager to explore. The morning after their dance, Thomas and Alera found themselves navigating a new reality. The previous day's events had shifted something fundamental between them, casting a warm glow over their interactions. As they prepared breakfast together, their movements were synchronized, comfortable yet charged with an unspoken understanding. Thomas broke the silence as they sat down to eat, his voice thoughtful. "Alera, about last night?" Alera looked up, her expression open and waiting. "Yes? I just want to say that I'm glad it happened. I feel like we've reached a new understanding," Thomas confessed, hoping his words would bridge any uncertainty. Alera smiled, a hint of relief in her gaze. "I'm glad too. I was worried you might have regrets." Thomas shook his head emphatically. "No, not at all. It's just, this is new for me. I didn't expect to find someone like you when I set out on this journey." Alera's hand reached across the table, touching his gently. "Nor did I expect to find such companionship again. It's a pleasant surprise." Their conversation moved on to plans for the day. Thomas suggested they take a walk through a nearby forest that Alera had mentioned was particularly beautiful this time of year. She agreed enthusiastically, eager to share more of her world with him. As they walked through the lush, towering forest, the light filtered through the leaves in dazzling patterns. Alera pointed out various medicinal plants and explained their uses. Thomas listened intently, documenting everything with his handheld scanner, but his attention was mostly on Alera. Her passion for her environment was infectious, and he found himself falling even deeper for her spirit and knowledge. At one point, they came upon a small clearing where the sunlight streamed through unobstructed. Alera stopped and looked around, a thoughtful expression on her face. "This place," she began, "is special to Zephyrians. It's a place of connection, where we believe the energy of the universe converges. We come here to reflect and find peace." Thomas looked around, feeling a sense of calm wash over him. "It's beautiful," he said. "Do you come here often?" "Not as often as I'd like," Alera admitted. "But I always feel refreshed when I do." They spent a few moments in silence, each lost in thought. Eventually, Thomas spoke up. "Alera, can I ask you something personal?" Alera nodded, turning to face him. "Of course. How do you feel about us? What we're doing? Is this okay with you?" Alera's eyes met his, her look earnest. "Thomas, since you arrived, there's been a shift in my world. I feel alive, vibrant, and hopeful in ways I hadn't in a long time. What we have, it's more than okay. It's wonderful." Thomas's heart felt full at her words. He stepped closer, cupping her face gently in his hands. "I feel the same," he murmured before leaning in to kiss her softly. The kiss was tender and filled with the promises of new beginnings. When they parted, they continued their walk, hands clasped together, their spirits lifted by mutual feelings. As the day faded into evening, they prepared dinner together, their earlier tasks performed with a joyful ease. Conversation flowed freely, filled with laughter and shared dreams. That night, as they lay side by side, Thomas whispered into the darkness, "Lonely alien housewife begs to be taken as a wife," echoing Alara's own words from days ago. Alara chuckled softly, the sound resonating in the quiet room. "And what does the lonely human explorer say in return?" "He says," Thomas replied, his voice low and filled with emotion, "he's never felt less lonely, and he's grateful every day that his journey brought him here." In the darkness, Alara moved closer, her whisper a tender caress. "Then let's not be lonely anymore." With those words, a deeper connection was forged, one that transcended the stars and spoke of a shared future, whatever it might hold. As the days melded into weeks, Thomas and Alara's relationship blossomed under the dual suns of Zeria. Their daily routines were interwoven with shared tasks and moments of learning about each other's worlds. Today, they decided to visit the nearby river, a place Alara described with fondness but hadn't visited since her solitude began. Preparing for their day out, Thomas packed a light meal while Alara gathered necessary supplies. "We should take a swim," Alara suggested, her eyes bright. "The water is cool and refreshing, perfect on a day like this." "Sounds perfect," Thomas agreed, smiling at her enthusiasm. Together, they set off towards the river, the path familiar to Alara but new and exciting to Thomas. Arriving at the riverbank, the scene took Thomas's breath away. The water sparkled under the sunlight, surrounded by flowering plants and towering trees, their leaves rustling softly in the gentle breeze. "It's beautiful," Thomas remarked, setting down their belongings. "It's one of my favorite places," Alara said. She took his hand and led him closer to the water. "Let's swim." Thomas laughed as they waded into the cool, clear water. They splashed and swam, enjoying the refreshing embrace of the river. After a while, they floated on their backs, watching the clouds drift by in the sky above. "This is peace," Thomas said after a while, his voice a contented murmur. Alara turned to him, her expression thoughtful. "It's moments like these I wish could last forever." "Who says they can't?" "In a way, we make our own forever, don't we?" Thomas replied, reaching out to twine his fingers with hers. Alara squeezed his hand, smiling. "Maybe we do." After swimming, they sat on the riverbank, sharing the meal Thomas had packed. As they ate, Thomas grew contemplative. "Alara, I've been thinking." "What is it?" Alara looked at him with a mix of curiosity and concern. "I've been on Zeria for weeks now, and every day has been better than the last. I feel at home here with you." Thomas paused, searching her face for any sign of her feelings. "I'd like to stay permanently if you'll have me." Alara's reaction was immediate and joyful. "Nothing would make me happier, Thomas." "I was hoping you'd say that." Their conversation turned to plans for the future, discussing how they might integrate their lives more deeply. Alara spoke of community traditions, and Thomas shared ideas from Earth that might benefit their life together. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with hues of orange and purple, they packed up their things and started back toward Alara's home. Hand in hand, they walked in comfortable silence, each lost in thoughts of a shared future. That evening, as they prepared dinner together in Alara's kitchen, the closeness between them felt more profound. Every touch and glance held a new significance, laden with the promise of days and years to come. After they ate, Thomas pulled Alara into an impromptu dance in the living room, much to her delight. They moved slowly to a melody only they could hear, wrapped in each other's arms. "Alara," Thomas whispered as they danced, "thank you for sharing your world with me, for being my world." Alara looked up at him, her eyes shining with tears and happiness. "And thank you for embracing it, for embracing me. I've never been so sure of anything." As the dance ended, they stood embracing, feeling the rightness of their togetherness. It was a surrender not to fate, but to a choice lovingly made, a commitment to forge a path together, come what may. That night, as they lay beside each other, the stars outside seemed to shine just for them, their light a gentle, constant presence in the vast universe that now felt a little bit smaller, a little bit warmer. In the weeks that followed, Thomas and Alara's decision to intertwine their lives more deeply brought with it both joy and unexpected challenges. Their mutual contentment was occasionally shadowed by the curious and sometimes disapproving glances of Alara's fellow villagers. One morning, while walking through the village market together, the couple sensed the shift in the air. Whispers followed them as they passed by the stalls, the usual warm greetings noticeably cooler. Thomas, ever sensitive to Alara's comfort, leaned closer and whispered, "Does this bother you?" Alara sighed, a slight frown marring her usually serene face. "It does a bit, but I expected it. Change is hard for many." As they stopped by a stall to pick up some fresh fruits, the vendor, an elderly Zephyrian named Miro, decided to voice the unspoken questions. "Alara, who is this man? Why is he staying here with you?" Alara held Thomas's hand tighter, facing Miro with a calm resolve. "This is Thomas, and he is with me because we have chosen to be together." Miro looked from Alara to Thomas, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then, surprisingly, he nodded. "If he makes you happy, Alara, that is good. But understand, not everyone will see it that way." "Thank you, Miro. We hope, in time, they will see the happiness and accept it," Thomas added, grateful for the man's understanding. Encouraged by Miro's response, Thomas suggested they invite some of the villagers to their home for a meal, hoping personal interactions would bridge the gap between suspicion and acceptance. "That's a wonderful idea," Alara agreed. "Let them see for themselves how we live, how we love." Preparations began the next day. Thomas took it upon himself to learn more about Zephyrian culinary traditions from Alara, wanting to contribute to the meal. They decided on a menu that mixed both earthly and Zephyrian dishes, a symbol of their union. On the evening of the dinner, guests began to arrive, curious and a bit cautious. Alara greeted each one with her usual warmth, and Thomas, following her lead, did his best to make everyone feel welcome. As the night progressed, the initial stiffness gave way to laughter and shared stories. Thomas found himself deep in conversation with a group of Alara's friends, explaining human customs and answering questions about Earth. "How do you find our world, Thomas?" one of the guests, a middle-aged Zephyrian named Lyra, asked. "It's beautiful, peaceful," Thomas replied. "It's very different from Earth in many ways, but it has felt like home ever since I arrived." The guests listened intently, and as Thomas spoke more about his journey and his reasons for staying, the atmosphere warmed considerably. Later, as Alara served a dessert made from a local fruit topped with a cream Thomas had prepared, Lyra spoke again. "Alara has always been one of us, and now, seeing her this happy, how can we not accept the source of her happiness?" The evening ended on a high note, with many guests expressing their good wishes and some even apologizing for their initial skepticism. As they cleaned up after the guests had left, Alara leaned against Thomas, her smile tired but genuine. "That went better than I hoped." "It did," Thomas agreed, wrapping his arm around her. "It feels like we've turned a corner tonight." Alara nodded. "Yes, we have." Together. As they stood in their kitchen, the challenges of merging their worlds seemed less daunting. They knew that not every day would be easy, but as long as they faced them together, they could navigate any storm. Their love, a quiet yet powerful force, had begun to change minds and, hopefully, hearts as well. Several months had passed since Thomas and Alara's dinner with the villagers. The seasons on Zeria shifted, mirroring the changes in the community's perception of the couple. Acceptance was blossoming slowly, like the exotic flowers in Alara's garden. One crisp morning, as they were tending to the garden together, a distant hum broke their peaceful routine. Thomas straightened up, shielding his eyes from the sun to look towards the horizon. A spacecraft, sleek and unfamiliar, was descending towards the village. "Alara, do you see that?" he asked, nodding towards the ship. Alara looked up, her eyes narrowing as she identified the incoming craft. "That's a Zephyrian model, but I don't recognize the markings." They watched in silence as the ship landed just outside the village. Soon, a figure emerged, a Zephyrian man, tall and imposing, with a stern look that seemed out of place in the peaceful setting. Alara gasped softly, a hand going to her mouth. "It's Joran, my husband." Thomas felt a chill run down his spine. He had heard much about Joran from Alara, but he had never expected him to return. "What do you want to do?" he asked quietly, his gaze never leaving the approaching figure. "I need to talk to him." "We should both talk to him," Alara said, her voice steady despite the sudden tension. They met Joran at the edge of their property. The man's eyes flicked between Thomas and Alara, his expression unreadable. "Alara, I've returned for you," Joran began, his voice carrying a commanding tone. "It's time to leave this place. I have secured a position in another system. It offers more than we ever hoped for." Alara took a deep breath, her posture firm. "Joran, things have changed. I am not the same person you left behind. I've built a life here with Thomas." Joran's gaze shifted to Thomas, his eyes narrowing. "And you, human, what do you think you're doing? Do you understand the consequences of your actions here?" Thomas met Joran's gaze without flinching. "I understand more than you know. I love Alara, and I respect her decisions. She's not property to be claimed, Joran. She's a person, and she has made her choice." The tension between the two men was palpable. Alara stepped between them, her voice calm but firm. "Joran, please understand. I appreciate what you've offered, but my place is here now, with Thomas. This is my home." Joran looked at Alara, then at the home and garden she and Thomas had cultivated together. His expression softened slightly, the rigid lines of his face relaxing as he took in the scene before him. "This is what you want?" he asked, finally, his voice less certain. Alara nodded. "Yes, it is." Joran took a long look around, then back at Alara. "I see." He paused, then continued. "I wish you happiness, Alara. I truly do." Turning to Thomas, he added, "Take care of her." With those words, Joran walked back to his ship. Alara and Thomas watched in silence as the spacecraft lifted off, leaving a swirl of dust in its wake. As the echo of the engines faded, Alara leaned into Thomas, her relief palpable. "Thank you," she whispered. Thomas wrapped his arms around her. "You don't have to thank me. I'm here for you, just as you are for me. Always." The couple returned to their garden, the normalcy of their task a stark contrast to the turmoil of the morning. As they resumed their work, the weight of Joran's visit lifted, replaced by a renewed sense of commitment to their shared life. That evening, as they sat watching the sunset, Alara spoke. "Today was hard, but it's made me realize how right this feels. Being here with you, it's where I belong." Thomas took her hand, squeezing it gently. "I feel the same. Whatever comes, we face it together." Their conversation drifted into plans for the future, their voices blending with the gentle sounds of the Zephyrian night. The challenges of the day had reaffirmed their bond, strengthening their resolve to build a life together, no matter what might come their way. As the Zephyrian year drew to a close, Thomas and Alara found themselves reflecting on the remarkable journey they had embarked upon together. They sat on the porch of their home, watching as the first stars of the evening began to twinkle in the twilight sky. Thomas broke the comfortable silence between them, his voice tinged with a mix of nostalgia and anticipation. "Do you remember the first day I landed here? How different everything seemed." Alara smiled, turning to look at him. "I do. I never imagined then how deeply our lives would intertwine. It feels like we've created a small universe of our own here." Thomas nodded, his hand finding hers. "We have. And I've been thinking, maybe it's time we explore more of your beautiful galaxy together. There's so much more out there, and I want to see it with you." Alara's eyes lit up at the suggestion. "Really? You mean, leave Zephyria? Just for a while? We could travel, see other planets, other civilizations? We can always come back," Thomas proposed, excited by the idea of sharing new adventures with her. Alara considered this, the idea growing on her as she imagined the possibilities. "That sounds wonderful, but what about our home? Our friends here? We'll come back, I promise. This will always be our home." But I think part of building our future together is experiencing everything that life has to offer. Across the stars and back, Thomas reassured her. Alara nodded slowly, her excitement building. Yes, let's do it. It's time for new adventures. Together, their decision made, they spent the next few weeks preparing for their journey. They informed their friends and neighbors, who, despite initial surprises, supported their decision to explore the universe. Alara and Thomas worked closely, making plans, researching destinations, and preparing their spacecraft for the long journey ahead. On the eve of their departure, they held a small farewell gathering. The community came together to wish them well, offering gifts and good wishes for their travels. The warmth and acceptance they received filled both Thomas and Alara with gratitude and love for their Zephyrian family. The next morning, as they loaded the last of their supplies onto the spacecraft, Alara looked around at the home they had built together. "I'm going to miss this place," she said softly. Thomas wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "Me too. But think of all the stories we'll bring back with us." Alara smiled, her resolve strengthened by his words. "You're right. Let's make some incredible memories." With a final check of their systems, Thomas piloted the spacecraft away from Zeria. As the planet shrank behind them, Alara and Thomas watched from the cockpit, their hands clasped together. As they ventured into the unknown, the vastness of space around them seemed less daunting with their shared purpose. They knew that no matter where they went, the love and life they shared would guide them back home. "Here's to the stars, to exploration, and to us," Thomas said, looking over at Alara with a loving smile. "To us," Alara echoed, returning his smile with equal warmth. The spacecraft surged forward, slipping into the starlit vastness of space, carrying two explorers bound by love and curiosity, ready to write their future, a future as limitless as the universe itself.